It was late afternoon when Tom wandered into the city park, his footsteps slow and heavy, the weight of the day's fatigue pressing down on his shoulders. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange hue across the skyline, but the shadows felt longer and deeper in his heart. Tom had been living on the streets for almost a year now, his once promising life reduced to a series of cold nights and desperate searches for food. Once a father and a husband, he had lost everything after a series of unfortunate events: his job, his family, his dignity. The streets had become his home, and each day blended into the next, a never-ending cycle of survival. He had tried to keep his head above water, but the fight had worn him down. He no longer thought about the past or the future. He simply existed. As he sat down on a park bench, pulling his tattered jacket tighter around him for warmth, he noticed something strange. Out of the corner of his eye, a dog, a German shepherd, its coat a mix of dark brown and black, stood just beyond the trees. Its stance was calm, alert, as if it were waiting for something or someone. Tom rubbed his eyes, wondering if he was imagining it. There were many stray dogs around the park, but this one was different. There was something in the dog's gaze that made Tom's heart skip. It was as though the dog had been watching him for some time. The dog took a step closer, then another, and before Tom could react, it was standing right in front of him, its head tilted slightly as it looked up at him with curious eyes. Tom froze. He had no food to offer, no reason for the dog to approach him. He had heard of street dogs being wary of humans, especially those without a home, but this one seemed different. It was clean, well-fed, its fur shining under the fading sunlight. "Hey." "There," Tom whispered, unsure of what to do. His voice felt rusty, as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in ages. He slowly extended his hand, not wanting to startle the dog, but the dog didn't hesitate. It took a step closer, sniffing his hand gently before licking it, a soft, almost reassuring gesture. Tom's heart swelled with a mix of confusion and gratitude. He hadn't had a companion in so long, and this dog, this perfect stranger, was offering him something he hadn't felt in months: connection. "You're lost too, aren't you?" he muttered to the dog, his voice cracking. The dog tilted its head again, as if understanding. Tom chuckled softly, a bittersweet laugh. "I guess we're both a little lost." The dog sat down beside him, its warm body a comforting presence, against the cold evening air. Tom didn't know what drew him to the dog or why it had chosen him. Maybe it was just fate, or maybe it was because they both needed each other. Either way, something had changed in that moment. For the first time, in a long time, Tom felt like he wasn't alone. The days that followed felt different. Every time Tom woke up in the park or found himself walking through the streets, the dog was there, never too far behind. It followed him everywhere, through alleyways, across busy intersections, and even to the shelter where Tom had sometimes tried to sleep for a few hours. It was as though the dog had made a silent promise to stay with him, a bond that didn't need words to be understood. Tom named the dog Max. It just seemed right. Max had a certain strength about him, a quiet determination that mirrored Tom's own, though it had been buried under layers of hardship and self-doubt. With Max by his side, things began to shift for Tom, even if only a little. The dog's presence became a constant source of comfort, a reminder that he wasn't entirely invisible in the world. Max would nudge him awake in the mornings, his warm body pressing against Tom's side, and then they would go in search of food or a safe place to rest. One day, as they wandered through the streets, Tom noticed a small group of people gathered outside a local diner. A man was handing out sandwiches, and a few others were handing out warm drinks. It was a rare sight, especially in a city where people often turned a blind eye to those in need. Tom hesitated. He had never asked for charity, but Max sat patiently. By his side, his eyes focused on the sandwiches, as if urging Tom to take the step. Tom took a deep breath and walked over. The man handing out food looked up at him and gave a small, kind smile. "You look like you could use a meal," the man said, offering a sandwich. Tom took it, his hands shaking slightly as he wrapped his fingers around the bread. "Thank you," he murmured. Max, sitting quietly at his feet, looked up at the man with expectant eyes. The man chuckled. "You too, huh?" He reached into a bag and pulled out a second sandwich, placing it down in front of Max. Max eagerly took the food, his tail wagging as he devoured the sandwich with surprising speed. Tom couldn't help but laugh, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. As he and Max sat down on a nearby bench, eating their meal, Tom felt something stir within him, a spark of hope. For the first time, he didn't feel completely hopeless. Max had changed everything. He had brought a sense of purpose, even if small, into Tom's world. And it wasn't just about the food or the shelter. It was the companionship, the shared moments of quiet understanding between them. Weeks turned into months, and Max's presence in Tom's life only grew stronger. They became a familiar sight in the park. Tom and his loyal dog, both navigating the ups and downs of life on the streets together. But as time passed, Tom noticed something in himself that he hadn't felt before. The desire to change, to not just survive, but to live. Max had shown him the importance of small moments of joy, the quiet companionship of a walk, the joy of sharing a meal, the comfort of knowing someone would always be there. Tom began to take better care of himself. He cleaned himself up when he could, sought out shelter programs that could help him find work, and started speaking to the people around him, not just the passers-by, but the kind souls who were willing to listen. One day, as Tom was sitting on the park bench, talking to a kind-hearted social worker, she offered him a chance he never thought he would have. A spot in a rehabilitation program that would help him get back on his feet. It wasn't a guaranteed solution, but it was a chance. Max, ever the silent companion, sat beside him, his tail gently wagging. Tom looked down at him, a mixture of gratitude and love filling his chest. Without Max, he never would have believed. In this moment, this possibility, with Max by his side, Tom knew he could face whatever came next. And though their lives had started in the shadows, together they would forge a new path, one filled with hope, purpose, and the unwavering bond. A friendship that had saved them both. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Tom smiled. For the first time in a long time, he saw the future, and it no longer seemed so bleak. Max, his faithful companion, was the key to the change they had both been waiting for, and with that, they walked forward, side by side, ready to face whatever the world had in store. It had been several weeks since Tom had enrolled in the rehabilitation program. He had his ups and downs, some days filled with small victories, others marked by struggles that threatened to pull him back into the darkness. But with Max by his side, Tom was learning to fight for himself, for their future. The program was tough, long hours, early mornings, and group meetings that sometimes felt overwhelming. But Tom was committed, pushing himself to show up each day. He kept telling himself that the effort was worth it. And slowly, the change was becoming visible, not just to others, but to him too. One evening, after a long day of work at a local cafe where Tom had recently started a part-time job, he sat on the park bench where it all began. Max sat beside him, his head resting on Tom's knee, his eyes soft and knowing. It had become their ritual, to sit and reflect on the day, finding comfort in the quiet. Tom took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs, and smiled to himself. For the first time in a long time, he felt proud of the progress he had made, proud of the effort he was putting in, and proud of the bond he had with Max. "You know, buddy," Tom said, his voice quiet but full of emotion, "I don't think I could have done any of this without you." Max didn't respond in words, but the slight wag of his tail and the look of trust in his eyes said it all. The dog had been there through everything, the darkest nights, the loneliest days, and now, as Tom began to rebuild his life, Max was there still, his steady presence reminding Tom that he wasn't alone. Over time, Tom began to find a rhythm in his life. He worked the cafe shifts, earning just enough to cover his expenses while continuing the rehabilitation program. The work was exhausting, but rewarding. It wasn't the glamorous life he had once dreamed of, but it was honest work, and it gave him a sense of purpose. Max, too, seemed to thrive. Tom noticed that the dog was healthier, happier. He was more than just a companion now. Max was a part of Tom's family, and he had become the heart of their small world. In the evenings, when Tom got home from work, Max greeted him with the same enthusiasm, as if the day apart had been too long, even though it was only a few hours. One morning, Tom found himself sitting at the kitchen table of the small apartment he had moved into with Max. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The place was modest and there were still repairs to be made, but it was a step up from the street. It felt like home. As he ate his breakfast, Tom realized something. He had stopped thinking about what he had lost. Instead, he was focusing on what he had gained. The work, the new routine, the connection with the people around him. It was all slowly becoming a new life, a life that was worth living, a life that was beginning to feel whole again. Max trotted into the kitchen, his tail wagging, and nudged Tom's hand for attention. Tom smiled and petted him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude wash over him. He didn't need a grand plan or the perfect future. He had Max, and together they were creating something meaningful. The past was never far from Tom's mind, but it no longer held the power it once did. The memories of losing his family, his job, his home, those moments of pain still stung, but they no longer defined him. Instead, it was the quiet moments with Max, the small victories each day, that were becoming the foundation of his life. The world outside was still difficult. Tom knew there were challenges ahead. There always would be. But now he had the strength to face them, and he had Max by his side, the dog who had chosen him when he had nothing to offer. One morning, as they walked through the park on their usual route, Tom noticed a family sitting near the fountain, watching their young children play. The sight made his heart ache, a reminder of what he had once lost. But instead of sinking into sorrow, Tom took a deep breath and looked down at Max, who trotted beside him with a joyful bounce in his step. "Maybe, one day," Tom muttered to Max, a quiet hope flickering in his chest. "Maybe one day we'll have a family again. You, me, and, well, whatever comes next." Max looked up at him, ears perked, as if he understood every word. The sun was setting once again as Tom and Max walked home. It was a peaceful evening, and the air felt fresh with the promise of a new beginning. Tom had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't walking it alone. He had Max, and with him, anything was possible. Together, they were building a new life, one step at a time, and with that, Tom knew that the road ahead, though uncertain, was worth every moment of the journey. The weeks continued to unfold with small, steady victories. Tom's life had become more predictable, more stable than it had been in years. The routines he had once resisted, working, taking care of himself, and building his relationship with Max, had now become the foundation of his new existence. But life, as Tom was learning, was rarely without its challenges. One evening, after a long day of work at the cafe, Tom returned home to find a notice on the door of his apartment building. It was an eviction notice, informing him that the building was being sold, and all tenants would have to vacate within the next 30 days. Tom's heart sank as he stared at the paper. The progress he had made, the stability he had finally begun. To feel seemed fragile in the face of this new setback. He had worked so hard to get here, to leave the streets behind and create a life for himself and Max, and now it felt like it could all be taken away in an instant. Max, ever the faithful companion, seemed to sense Tom's distress. The dog nuzzled his hand, offering the kind of quiet support that had come to mean so much. Tom crouched down and scratched behind Max's ears, trying to steady his thoughts. "Guess we're not out of the woods yet, huh, buddy?" Tom said, his voice more strained than he intended. He glanced at the notice again, feeling the pressure in his chest grow. He wasn't sure what to do. The building's new owners weren't required to give much time for relocation, and he hadn't been able to save enough money to find a new place yet. For a brief moment, the weight of his old life, of the uncertainty and fear, returned with full force. He had barely climbed out of one hole, and now it seemed like another was opening up beneath him. But then, as Tom sank down onto the couch, something shifted inside him. He took a deep breath, his eyes locking with Max's. The dog sat down beside him, his tail swishing slowly, as if reminding Tom that they had faced far worse together. Tom's mind began to turn, processing the options in front of him. He didn't have much, but he had Max, and he had the drive to keep going, no matter what. He would figure this out. He had to. The next morning, Tom called around to local shelters, trying to find a new place to stay. He spoke to friends and even considered returning to the park, but something in him refused to go backward. He had come too far. Max had come too far. And then, just when it seemed like hope was slipping away, a call came in from the social worker who had helped him get into the rehabilitation program. She had heard about the eviction and had a potential solution. There was a small, non-profit housing complex that offered affordable apartments to people like Tom, those who had struggled but were making strides to rebuild their lives. It wasn't much, but it was a chance. "Tom, it's not a guarantee," the social worker explained, her voice kind but firm. "But there's a spot opening up soon. They're not a regular landlord, but they want to help people who are trying to turn their lives around. I'll send in your application right away. If everything goes well, it could be the place you need." Relief washed over Tom, though he still knew there were hurdles ahead. But for the first time in a while, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the break he needed. A week passed before Tom received the news. He had been accepted into the non-profit housing program. The apartment was modest, but it was affordable and located in a quieter part of town, away from the hustle and bustle that had become a part of Tom's daily life. It was a fresh start, and it came at just the right time. Tom packed his few belongings into a small cart and began the process of moving out of the apartment. It wasn't much. Only a few worn clothes, some old furniture, and a few personal items that had survived the time on the streets. Max trotted alongside him, the excitement evident in his wagging tail. Even he seemed to sense that something good was coming their way. When they arrived at the new place, Tom felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. The building was old, but it was clean and well-maintained. There was a small courtyard in the center, where residents could relax, and the atmosphere was calm, far removed from the chaos of his past life. But as Tom unloaded his things, he couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. This wasn't the life he had imagined, the future he had once dreamed of, but it was a life. It was a new chapter, and he was ready to write it, even if the pages weren't perfectly clean. The first few days in the new apartment were quiet. Tom adjusted to the smaller space, unpacking his belongings and making it feel like home. Max quickly found his spot by the window, watching the world go by with the same patient expression he always wore. But there were challenges ahead. ones that Tom had not anticipated. The building's residents, although kind, had their own struggles. Many of them were in similar situations, trying to rebuild their lives after losing everything. While most were welcoming, there was a sense of isolation, of being on the fringe of society. Tom realized he wasn't just starting over in a new place. He was navigating a community of people who had all faced similar battles, and sometimes it felt like the wounds of the past still lingered. He made an effort to talk to his neighbors, to form connections, but it wasn't always easy. Some people were reluctant to open up, and others kept to themselves. Still, Tom kept trying. He knew that the more connections he made, the stronger his foundation would become. One afternoon, as Tom sat outside with Max in the courtyard, a young woman approached. She was around his age, with dark hair tied back in a ponytail and a quiet smile. "I've seen you around," she said softly, sitting a few feet away. "You're new here, right?" Tom nodded, offering a tentative smile. "Yeah, just moved in. This is Max," he said, patting the dog's head. Max perked up at the mention of his name and stood, trotting over to the woman. She laughed softly as he nuzzled her hand. "He's a good dog," she said. "I can see why you're doing well." Tom wasn't sure what she meant by that, but he appreciated the compliment. "He's the reason I'm doing well," he said quietly. "Without him, I don't think I'd have made it this far." The woman nodded, her eyes softening. "I get it. My dog, Luna, kept me going through some of my toughest times. They're more than pets, they're family." The two sat in silence for a while, watching their dogs interact. For the first time since moving in, Tom felt like he belonged. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was fighting the world alone. With Max by his side, Tom had a new home, a new community, and the promise of a future that, while uncertain, was full of possibility. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, knowing that they were no longer alone. Months passed since Tom and Max had settled into their new apartment. The initial struggles had gradually faded into the background as the two of them adjusted to life in their small but safe home. Tom had continued working at the cafe, his job becoming less of a burden and more of a routine that grounded him. He had made more connections in the building, forming bonds with people who understood what it meant to fight for a fresh start. Max, too, seemed to thrive in their new environment. The dog had grown more energetic, more playful, and always by Tom's side, his loyalty unwavering. The bond between them had deepened, becoming something unspoken but undeniably strong. One evening, as Tom walked home from work, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The streetlights were dim, the air crisp, and for the first time, Tom wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. The past, the long stretch of homelessness, the struggles with addiction, the fear of never finding his place felt distant. It was as if that life had belonged to someone else. As he reached their building, Max bounded up the stairs ahead of him, tail wagging excitedly. Tom smiled and followed, feeling the weight of the day lift from his shoulders. Inside the apartment, he found a small surprise waiting for him on the counter. A letter from the cafe owner, thanking him for his hard work and offering him more hours, a potential promotion. It wasn't much, but it was a sign of the progress he was making. Tom's heart swelled with pride. He had earned this, all of it, and he wasn't done yet. He set the letter aside, kneeling down to pet Max, who was looking up at him with expectant eyes. "Looks like we're moving up, buddy," Tom said softly. "Things are finally starting to look up." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. With his new promotion at the cafe, Tom's financial situation stabilized. He started saving for a better future, a place that might feel more like a permanent home. The city had begun to feel less like a daunting maze and more like a place where Tom and Max could carve out a real life. As he continued to rebuild, he often found himself reflecting on how far they had come. Max had not just been his companion. He had been his lifeline. The dog had given him the strength to face his demons and the courage to keep moving forward. In return, Tom had given Max a home, a future. Together, they had made each other whole again. One rainy evening, as Tom and Max sat on the couch, a soft knock echoed from the door. Tom stood, unsure who it might be. When he opened it, he found his neighbor, the young woman from the courtyard, standing in the hallway with her dog, Luna, by her side. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said with a shy smile. "I just thought you might want to join me for a walk. Luna's been getting restless, and Max seems like he'd enjoy the company." Tom hesitated for a moment before nodding. He had made progress, but he had yet to open up to many people outside of work. Still, something about the offer felt right. "That sounds good," Tom said, grabbing Max's leash. "Let me grab my jacket." They walked together, Max and Luna trotting happily alongside them as the rain pattered lightly against the pavement. The evening was quiet. The only sounds the soft padding of the dog's paws and the occasional rustle of the trees. In the wind, Tom glanced over at his neighbor, feeling a sense of camaraderie with someone who understood the weight of rebuilding from nothing. "You know," she said, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot lately about the past. It's funny how we think we're alone in our struggles, but everyone has a story. You and Max, you've come a long way. It's inspiring." Tom smiled, feeling the warmth of her words settle inside him. "I couldn't have done it without him," he replied, glancing down at Max, who looked up at him with those knowing eyes. As they walked through the park, the lights of the city twinkling in the distance, Tom realized that while he hadn't reached all of his goals, he had achieved something even more important. He had found peace. His future, once a blurry, unreachable horizon, now seemed tangible within his grasp. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer controlled him, and for the first time he allowed himself to believe that the future held promise. That night after the walk, Tom sat on the couch with Max, the dog resting beside him. The apartment, though small, felt like home. Max let out a soft sigh, as if content in the stillness of the evening. "You and me, buddy," Tom said quietly, rubbing Max's head. "We've been through a lot, but I think we're going to be okay." Max's tail thumped softly against the floor, and Tom smiled, realizing that yes, they would be okay. Together they had found a new beginning, and for the first time in years, Tom felt like he had a place in this world. It was a small one perhaps, but it was his, and with Max by his side, that was all that mattered.